this presentation I'm going to introduce you to the challenge we run as part of the GENEA 2020 workshop. This challenge was focused on generating speech-driven gesticulation for an avatar given a dataset of human speech and movement. For the challenge we used the Trinity Speech Gesture dataset. This dataset contains 244 minutes of audio and 3D motion capture. Since the challenge focused on generating co-speech gestures, only 15 upper body joints were considered. We also did not include finger data due to the issues with the capture quality. On top of the original dataset, we annotated the speech audio with time-aligned transcription. The resulting GENEA challenge dataset is now publicly available in the same repository as the original Trinity Speech Gesture data. First, I will show an example clip from the dataset.
I'm going to still talk about magic and books because, hey, that's just the kind of guy I am.
We had 15 registrations. This resulted in 5 submissions and 2 open repositories of code from challenge systems. We had to follow a strict timeline, such that the authors had plenty of time to write a challenge paper about their results. On the 1st of July, we released the dataset. This was followed by a release of the test speech, for which participants had to generate synthetic motion on August 7. Submission of system-generated motion closed on August 15. No challenge comes without rules, and we had to establish some rules to make a fair challenge possible. Each team could only enter one system into the evaluation. We allowed participants to use external data, but only if this was openly available to the other participants. Participants were not allowed to do any manual post-processing on their generated motion, and finally, they had to present their approach at the workshop. In the challenge, we included several top lines and baselines. I will now briefly describe the 2 synthetic baselines, which were based on previous papers in the field with open code, and the 2 top lines, which were based on natural motion capture from the database. Our first baseline was an audio-only baseline based on the work by Taras Kucherenko et al. That appeared at IVA 2019. The model is based on neural networks and consists of 2 steps. First, it learns a lower dimensional representation of human motion using a denoising autoencoder neural network consisting of a motion encoder motion E and a motion decoder motion D. Second, it trained an encoder network speech E to map from speech to a corresponding motion representation with reduced dimensionality. At test time, the speech encoder and the motion decoder networks were combined. Speech E predicts motion representations based on a given speech signal, and motion D then decodes these representations to produce motion sequences. This model was trained on a challenge dataset, but it had some differences with the original implementation. For example, joint rotation values were synthesized instead of joint positions, and smoothing was applied using a Savitsky-Golay filter. The hyperparameters also differed. Our second baseline was a text-only baseline based on the work by Young-Woo Yoon et al., which appeared at ICRA 2019. The model was based on neural networks and consists of 2 parts. First, an encoder part which has the speech text as input. A latent representation of that is brought to the decoder, which has motion as input. The decoder then generates motion based on the latent representation of the text it received as input. Thanks to the annotations that were made, available for the Trinity Speech Gesture Motion dataset, it was possible to train this model on the challenge data. The model was adapted to synthesize joint rotation values instead of joint positions, and the word embeddings made use of a pre-trained fast text instead of GLOVE, which was used in the original implementation. Next to these 2 baseline models, we also included the ground truth and mismatched gesticulation. Mismatched in this case means that the gesticulation displayed does not align well with the audio and was taken from another point in time from the motion capture database. This gives a condition with high quality motion, but it has no relation to the current speech.
But the thing is that if you've actually fought people, if you've actually done stuff like Thai kickboxing or things like that, getting kicked or kneed by somebody, you know what that. The thing is that if you've actually fought people, if you've actually done stuff like Thai kickboxing or things like that, getting kicked or kneed by somebody, you know what that.
We made use of objective and subjective metrics to evaluate the submitted entries. Our first objective metric is the average jerk. This metric is often used in motion research. Our second objective metric is the distance between speed histograms. A well-performing model should show a similar movement speed profile as natural motion does, and thus the speed histograms of the two types of motion should be similar. We set up 2 crowdsourced user studies for the subjective evaluation of the gestures produced by the teams that participated in the challenge. For this, a new evaluation interface was designed based on the Mushra test standard from the field of audio engineering. In this interface, several videos for the same speech could be played on the same page and directly compared. The users had to rate the motion on a high-resolution scale in relation to a question prompted under the video. The order of different systems was randomized, and no information which was provided to the users. We ran 2 user studies. The first one asked, how human-like does the gesture motion appear? This question tried to investigate the quality of the motion while ignoring the link between motion and speech. For this reason, the audio track was omitted from these video stimuli. The next slide shows an example of a stimulus from this user study. The second user study asked, how appropriate are the gestures for the speech? This was intended to investigate the perceived link between motion and speech, and the raters were asked to ignore motion quality as much as possible. The next slide will show an example video.
The friend that I ran into was like smiling a lot. I was like, you never liked me this much. Why are you why are you so friendly right now? And it turned out because like the girl that like I'd been talking to.
A crowdsourced evaluation study was performed. We recruited participants from English-speaking countries on a prolific platform. Participants were paid around £6 for their participation in the user study and could participate in each study only once. In the user study, a total of up to 8 stimuli per page were presented for evaluation. Every user was subjected to 3 attention checks per study, and only subjects who passed all the attention checks were included in the analysis. This gave 125 and 126 participants for the 2 studies. As mentioned earlier, we had our natural motion as a condition N, mismatched M, audio baseline, text baseline, and the 5 entries from the participating teams. Here we see the results from the objective metrics. The results are in relation to the ground truth. We can see that there is not a single system that scores closest to the ground truth given the different objective metrics. This box plot shows the results from the human likeness evaluation with conditions ordered by the highest sample median rating first. The boxes may look quite wide since there is a lot of variation in the ratings from the user study. The 99% confidence intervals for the true median and mean are actually quite narrow. In particular, we see a substantial gap between natural motion on the left and other, synthetic motion to the right of it. The mismatch condition is not graphed here since its performance on this measure is identical to N. Here is a similar box plot but for how appropriate the motion was for the speech. There remains a large gap between N and other systems, but we can see that the results differ compared to the study on human likeness. Interestingly, the mismatch condition M had the best sample median rating after N, despite the fact that it was completely independent of the input speech. Because of the side-by-side nature of the Mushra-like evaluation, differences in user rating between systems can be analyzed using pairwise significance tests. Such tests find a large majority system pairs to be significantly different from each other in terms of median rating at the 1% level after Holm-Benferroni correction. This diagram illustrates these significant differences from the subjective evaluations. Overlapping or coinciding ellipses mean that the corresponding conditions were not significantly different in a statistical sense. If ellipses do not overlap, the difference was significant. We note that these partial ordering of the conditions differ between these 2 studies and also differ from the results of the objective evaluations. This indicates that the objective metrics are not a good indicator of actual motion quality and appropriateness. Another interesting observation is that most challenge entries surpass the baseline systems from last year, suggesting that this field is moving forward. For more figures and other information, please see our paper on Zenodo.